The desert stretched like a wound beneath the sky, fractured earth littered with the blackened skeletons of buildings. Sand clung to rusted metal, whispering in the wind. He hovered above it all, suspended in a sudden flare of bluish-white light that bent the air around him. His form was precise, almost geometric against the jagged horizon. Yet every motion carried the quiet authority of inevitability. He scanned the terrain with eyes that measured more than sight. Energy flows coiled around broken machinery, arcing in faint, erratic pulses that only he could see. The wasteland wasn't silent. He heard it as a low, persistent static, like the hum of 1,000 radios, each tuned to a different frequency, each humming secrets in a language he understood instinctively. Radiation drifted visibly in the air, subtle ripples of distortion that shimmered around the jagged remnants of collapsed walls. Beneath him, the sand rippled, catching stray fragments of metal. A toppled streetlight leaned precariously, its rusted base scratching against the ground, producing a faint, grating metallic whine that lingered in the air. The smell of ozone rose from the cracked asphalt, sharp and biting, and he inhaled without need. His body did not require air, but he noted it anyway, as though cataloging the sensation for some distant curiosity. He moved downward, a slow drift that stirred no wind, but displaced the light around him. The closer he came to the ground, the more the energy flow shifted, reacting to his presence. Patterns of radiation, previously diffused and distant, coalesced into bright arcs that traced the fractures in the earth like the skeleton of some unseen organism. The wasteland pulsed beneath him, indifferent and chaotic, yet perfectly structured in the way only he could perceive. Below, a collapsed settlement caught the faint gleam of his descent. The remnants of pre-war houses leaned against each other in fragile, impossible angles. Doors hung from rusted hinges, windows reflected the electric distortion around him, scattering light in jagged patterns across the sand. He paused mid-air, focusing on a single structure, a small house with its roof partially caved in, its interior littered with debris. The floors had buckled. Nothing in the house remained functional, but the energy there hummed sharply, concentrated around an old, cracked stove. He tilted his head, listening. A low, persistent vibration ran under his feet, transmitted from the fissured earth, barely perceptible to anyone else. It resonated with the high-frequency crackle of radiation in the air, a duet of tension and anticipation. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the faint curiosity stirring in the human remnants of the world, the instinct that once made people reach for the unknown. But the sensation was foreign to him, muted behind the wall of his detachment. A gust of wind lifted, carrying the scent of scorched metal and dusty sand. Tiny particles swirled around his form, tracing arcs of light against the distortion that clung to him. He extended a hand, not to touch, but to observe the ripple of energy as it responded. Electricity jumped in miniature sparks across the sand, drawn to his presence, and he noted it with something akin to interest. Below, a lone figure stirred, cautious, half hidden behind a broken wall. The person paused, staring upward. Their movements were deliberate, hesitant, tinged with fear that radiated instinctively from humans in the wasteland. He observed them for several beats, recording the pulse of fear, the flinch, the twitch of a hand brushing across a hip holster. It was fascinating, a minute pattern within the chaos, yet it produced no call to act. The distance between observation and interference was a constant measure he maintained. A sharp, high-pitched crackle punctuated the air, and a small arc of lightning the size of a finger danced across the exposed metal of a broken car nearby. The ambient static hummed louder as he drifted closer, coalescing into a low rhythmic vibration that resonated within the very particles of the sand. His vision shimmered as he passed through the threshold where radiation was strongest, colors bending unnaturally, hues impossible to name, shapes folding in on themselves for the briefest moments. The wasteland responded to him not as a god, not as a destroyer, but as a singular anomaly, an observer whose presence rewrote the patterns he moved through. He stopped above the settlement center, hovering above the cracked pavement. The energy swirled faster here, drawn to his focus, arcing in small, unpredictable bursts. His eyes lingered on the fissures in the ground, tracing the light as it followed hidden currents of power. Each pulse carried a story, a fragment of time, a residue of lives long gone, and a warning of what might persist. Yet he remained separate, untethered, watching the world react without judgment, cataloging every detail with the precision of inevitability. For a long moment, the desert was still but alive in ways only he could perceive. The wind whispered over sand and rubble, the low electric crackle vibrated through the air, and the muted metallic groans of the ruins whispered of collapse and endurance. He exhaled, not out of need, but as a measurement of space, of presence, of the connection between the world and the singular being now within it. And then, with a tilt of his head, he descended further into the heart of the wasteland. The square yawned beneath a half-collapsed clock tower, its hands frozen at a time long forgotten. Piles of rubble framed the streets, once neat avenues now fractured with deep fissures, each line cutting across the cracked concrete like a scar. Rusted vehicles leaned at impossible angles, their exposed metal jagged and flaky. The tang of oxidized steel filled the air, sharp and bitter, clinging to the back of the throat. Dust hovered in invisible clouds, drifting in eddies stirred by the occasional weak gust. He hovered above the center of the square, tilting his head. Below, 3 humans jostled over a dented metal crate. Their movements were frantic, desperate and flawed, hands scraping, knees slipping on rubble, voices hoarse and high-pitched with fear or anger. Each raised fist, each glare, each muttered curse left an imprint of energy that rippled faintly across the square. He perceived it in patterns of tension, flickers of aggression, moments of hesitation. The chaos was simple, yet intricate, a microcosm of survival distilled into motion. One of the scavengers, a wiry man with a bandolier of mismatched bullets, lunged toward the crate. His palm slammed against its corroded edge, and the metallic clang echoed sharply, vibrating through the debris. Another, a woman crouched low, attempted to pull the crate away with a grunt of effort. The third simply watched, eyes darting, mouth trembling with indecision. Their desperation was tangible, not just in the way he saw the energy flows, but in the fine tremor of their bodies, the shallow pattern of their breathing, the faint quiver of sweat on skin scorched by sun and radiation alike. He descended closer, the light around him dimming to a soft halo. As he lowered, the metallic tang of rust grew more pronounced, mixing with the faint, acrid smell of dust and distant smoke. The scavengers froze, eyes snapping upward. One hissed, backing away from the bluish glow surrounding him. The wiry man's hand tightened on the edge of the crate, knuckles whitening. He studied them without motion, a calm yet undeniable presence. Every pulse of energy, every small shift in stance, every tensioned muscle broadcast itself to him in clarity. He could reach down and lift the crate in an instant, could redirect the woman's hand or nudge the man back without force, but doing so violated the rhythm of the struggle he had arrived to observe. The energy flows around him rippled in muted anticipation, as if the desert itself hesitated, waiting for him to decide. The woman's voice broke the silence, cracking over the harsh winds. "Move, old man! You don't know what you're touching!" Her hands clutched at the crate with renewed effort, scraping against the coarse metal. The man stiffened, sputtering, and the third scavenger's eyes flicked rapidly between the arguing pair and the hovering figure above. Their focus wavered. Instinctive fear had begun to color their movements with uncertainty. He inclined his head slightly, and the energy around him pulsed. He didn't speak. He had no need, yet the human minds sensed his observation as pressure. A subtle shift in the radiation patterns danced over the metal debris, and the crate wobbled as if aware of his scrutiny. The scavengers flinched in unison, their reflexes sharpened by the imperceptible sway of power in the air. The wiry man finally shouted, stepping backward, sending the crate teetering. Its edge caught a shard of metal and tilted precariously, making a high-pitched screech as it scraped against rubble. The woman lunged to stabilize it, and in that instant, their combined effort shifted the crate upright, both breathing heavily, sweat-stinging eyes, the metallic tang of exertion thick in the air. The third scavenger exhaled, shaking, unsure whether relief or further fear dominated his pulse. He hovered above them, observing, cataloging, noting the delicate dance of survival, aggression, and hesitation. He could intervene, could adjust the energy flows to lift the crate without effort, could manipulate the patterns of fear and hope, but restraint defined him here, just as much as his power defined the way the world bent to his awareness. The entrance to the bunker yawned like a wound in the sand, a jagged rectangle of rusted steel half swallowed by rubble. He descended, the air around him bending faintly in his presence, the light of his form reflecting off peeling metal surfaces and cracked concrete. The electric hum of residual radiation beneath the desert floor threaded through the walls, a low, constant vibration that resonated against his perception. Inside, the bunker smelled of dust, damp, and chemicals. Decaying paper and the tang of irradiated fluids formed a pungent undercurrent that clung to the air, sharp against his senses. He inhaled, not for need, but to catalog. The smell was layered, the sweet mildew of forgotten fabrics, the acrid bite of metal oxidizing, the faint chemical tang of volatile compounds left from experiments long abandoned. Flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their wiring corroded, casting irregular shadows that shifted across the walls. He moved through them deliberately, footsteps silent, his gaze tracing energy traces that no human eye could detect. Each footfall stirred a faint cloud of dust, particles suspended in the dim light, catching his glow in tiny arcs that refracted like broken fragments of the sun. Crates and cabinets lined the walls, some toppled, others still upright, but spilling contents across the floor. He paused beside a metal shelf, leaning slightly to observe a toppled box of vials. The liquids within had separated over decades, some glowing faintly from lingering radioactive energy. Each vial vibrated with subtle patterns of decay, whispering their half-forgotten purpose. One container, a dark, thick fluid, pulsed faintly as though aware of his attention. He extended a hand, hovering just above it, and the molecules of liquid reacted with a quiet flare, tiny sparks flickering along the surface. The crate's cardboard had long since disintegrated, leaving paper fragments curling in the air currents. Their texture, brittle and almost translucent, crumbled under the faintest touch of displaced energy. He let them fall, noting how the air moved around them, how shadows bent across the warped metal of a nearby cabinet. Further down the corridor, he found archives, metal filing cabinets with drawers jammed and warped, spilling yellowed pages. The documents were dense with diagrams, mathematical formulas, schematics for reactors and weapons. He tilted his head, letting his vision parse the information at a speed impossible for any human. Each line of text radiated energy signatures, patterns of thought and intent frozen in time. He could see the human hands that had touched the paper, feel the decisions and miscalculations encoded in ink and graphite. A faint hiss broke the silence, the sound of escaping gas from a corroded canister in the corner. The odor was sharp and chemical, stinging the back of his throat despite the lack of lungs needing air. He turned slightly. The light refracted along the jagged edges of shattered glass and corroded metal, illuminating residue from experiments that had once been meticulous. He noted the faint shimmer of radiation clinging to powders in jars, to coils of wires, to cracked flasks. Each particle held a story of ambition, hubris, and decay. He paused at a table where schematics for a reactor lay pinned beneath a cracked sheet of plexiglass. His gaze lingered on the delicate drawings of control rods and cooling conduits, on annotations in spidery handwriting. Energy pulsed faintly along the lines of the diagrams, the residual thought of men and women who had once dreamed of controlling forces far greater than themselves. He tilted his head, considering not just the knowledge itself, but the intention behind it, the ethical compromises embedded in calculations and formulas. A low vibration ran through the floor beneath him, barely perceptible, but he felt it as an extension of the electric static already present in the air. The bunker seemed alive, or at least aware, responding to his presence, shifting subtly in alignment with the energy he radiated. Dust rose from the tiles in gentle plumes, floating upward and twisting in arcs of light that traced invisible currents across the ceiling. He knelt slightly beside a drawer, pushing it open without touch. Inside were journals, handwritten logs of experiments and observations. The paper was brittle, curling at the edges, its ink faded but still readable. Each page radiated faint emotional energy, excitement, fear, doubt. He traced the trajectory of the author's thoughts as if they were tangible threads, seeing where hope had turned into obsession, where calculation had veered into moral compromise. A sudden flash of residual energy from a shattered monitor nearby made him tilt his head back. Static cracked across the screen in irregular bursts, the sound sharp in the quiet of the bunker. He noted the patterns, the sequences that once controlled automated experiments, the energy arcs that had gone unchecked when the facility fell silent. The smell of burned circuits rose faintly, acrid and metallic, curling in the stagnant air. He exhaled, though not needing to, and observed the room as a whole. Broken instruments, toppled cabinets, yellowed pages, and corroded containers all lay in chaotic symmetry. An archive of ambition, frozen mid-thought. He catalogued it in silent precision, noting where each decision had failed, where each experiment had gone awry. Knowledge here was raw, unfiltered, and utterly human. And yet, in observing, he felt the faint echo of moral tension. How much could he absorb before detachment became complicity? A metallic clang echoed from deeper into the corridor, a jar falling or a loose pipe shifting. He turned his gaze, noting the energy signature of movement, small, deliberate, cautious. Perhaps another survivor, or perhaps just the bunker settling. He did not move toward it immediately. The space was his to observe, a lattice of energy and intent, morality and decay, fully alive beneath the flickering lights. The canyon opened before him like a wound in the earth, jagged cliffs of stone and twisted metal cutting vertical shadows into the sand below. Glowing fissures ran through the canyon floor, veins of molten energy pulsating faintly beneath a thin crust of cracked rock. Each pulse vibrated through the air and through him, a rhythm that was almost music if music were born of danger. The high-pitched hum of unstable radiation threaded through every stone, every grain of sand, resonating against the vibration of the canyon itself. He descended slowly, his light casting fractured reflections across the walls. Dust and irradiated particles swirled around him in eddies, catching on his form in tiny arcs. The canyon was alive with latent energy, and he sensed it, not just in the air, but in the fractures beneath the surface. Streams of radiation traced irregular patterns along rocks, responding subtly to his proximity. The ground trembled faintly underfoot, or perhaps under his presence, and he tilted his head, cataloging the minutiae of energy flows, their interactions, their potential consequences. Below him, the canyon narrowed into a jagged passage littered with rusted remnants of pre-war vehicles and collapsed shelters. The faint metallic tang of oxidation mixed with the sulphurous bite of fissured rock, curling into the back of his throat despite his lack of need for air. He let the smell linger in his perception, noting how it clung to the folds of energy pulsing through the canyon. He extended a hand toward one fissure, curious about the subtle ripple of energy along its edge. The moment his fingers brushed the threshold of light, the fissure responded. A pulse ran through the canyon floor, a sudden surge of heat and radiation. Tiny sparks leapt from exposed metal shards, arcs of energy streaking along the canyon walls. The ground vibrated beneath him with a low, constant thrum that felt both distant and immediate. He did not panic. His mind catalogued, measured, observed, but the pattern shifted in ways he had not fully anticipated. From the distance, a faint whistle rose from the canyon mouth, carried by the wind. Small settlements perched on distant plateaus caught the vibration of energy. In one cluster, a makeshift windmill rattled violently, its blades shaking against the mounting hum of radiation. The inhabitants, tiny figures barely distinguishable against the glowing horizon, froze mid-action, their energy flows spiking with fear and confusion. A sudden hiss of overcharged conduits echoed faintly, the sound slicing across the canyon like a thread of tension. He lowered closer to the fissures, observing the undulating patterns of radiation. Streams of blue and green light arced unpredictably from cracks, illuminating the canyon walls in fractured brilliance. Tiny fragments of rock floated briefly before crashing back to the floor. Tiny tremors synchronized with the hum of energy. He could see the sequence of cause and effect in crystalline clarity, the subtle interweaving of power and matter. But he did not intervene. He catalogued, measured, and noted, detached. A sharp pop echoed through the canyon as a fissure widened, tiny explosions of ionized gas crackling across the rock. The vibration underfoot intensified, rippling through the canyon in waves. He inhaled, sensing the chemical tang of ozone rising from disturbed metal and rock. The canyon responded to him in amplified resonance. The fissures arced violently now, tiny rivulets of energy skipping along the surface of exposed steel beams from collapsed structures. Suddenly, a small settlement perched on a distant ledge shuddered violently. Cracked walls rattled, debris shifted, and the inhabitants stumbled. Fear radiated from them in jagged pulses, visible to him in the subtle dance of energy surrounding each human form. Their survival instincts flared, chaotic and raw, mirrored by the sudden erratic arcs of radiation leaping from fissures. He had not intended harm, his attention was curiosity, but the canyon obeyed his presence in ways he had not predicted. He hovered, observing the unfolding chaos. Dust and sand spiraled in tiny tornadoes, catching on twisted metal fragments and reflecting the pale glow of radioactive energy. The high-pitched hum filled the air with almost tangible density, vibrating through rock and steel and the faintly quivering humans below. The canyon sang a fractured song of cause and consequence, and he noted every pattern, every oscillation. His mind, always calculating, recognized the moral weight of what was occurring. Power, observation, detachment, none existed in isolation. Each pulse of energy he had provoked sent ripples outward, touching lives, destabilizing structures, shifting the delicate equilibrium of survival. The canyon, though inert in a human sense, responded as if aware, its fissures bending to the resonance he emanated. The humans below, fragile and unaware of the forces shaping them, flinched, stumbled, and adjusted. Their fear was immediate, palpable, their lives intersecting with his presence in ways he could not fully retract. He exhaled, though not required to, a subtle acknowledgement of the unintended consequences. The fissures continued to pulse, tiny sparks dancing along rock and metal. Radiation streaked outward in faint ribbons of light, touching settlements with a trembling insistence. He catalogued each flare, each tremor, each spike of human energy, noting how his curiosity had transformed into influence, however unintentional. And yet he remained suspended, observing, detached but aware, the high-pitched hum of unstable radiation threading through the canyon like a living cord. Every vibration, every pulse of energy was a lesson written in light and matter, a warning, a consequence, an unavoidable result of presence. The river cut through the wasteland like a thread of dark mercury, its water blackened by years of fallout and sediment. Steam rose from cracks along its banks, curling into the morning air in thin, twisted wisps. A makeshift camp clung to the shore, built from scavenged sheets of metal and splintered wood. Smoke from several small fires rose in jagged columns, acrid and heavy, blending with the chemical tang of the irradiated river. He descended slowly, the light around him bending and refracting along the water's surface. His presence was immediate yet silent, like a distortion in the air itself. The survivors noticed him first as a shimmer against the morning haze, a figure hovering above the camp. They froze, tense, hands tightening on weapons fashioned from scavenged scraps. The male figure regarded them, cataloguing each movement in precise clarity. The flicker of fear in a young woman's eyes, the slight quiver of a man gripping a rusted rifle, the shifting posture of a boy clutching a bent metal rod, all visible as patterns of energy vibrating in faint arcs. They spoke in hushed tones, whispers layered with uncertainty. Who are you?" one of the men asked, voice hoarse from smoke and sun. He did not answer. His gaze swept over the camp, absorbing the architecture of survival. The makeshift tents pinned with stones, the careful spacing of fires to avoid radiation pockets, the arrangement of discarded crates that formed barricades. Each detail was a pulse in the energy grid of the camp, each flicker of motion a note in the rhythm of human existence. The survivors took a tentative step forward. The woman held out a hand, a gesture half begging, half commanding. "Can you help us? Please! The river's shifting. Radiation's worse this week. We can't reach the far side." Her voice trembled, cut with the tang of smoke and chemical tang of the air. He tilted his head, considering the request. Action would be effortless. He could alter the flow of the river, neutralize radiation, lift the camp out of harm's way. Yet in the same instant, he perceived the delicate balance of dependence and survival that bound them here. Interference would erase the struggle that defined their lives, collapsing their agency. One of the men took a step back, uncertainty etching his posture. Wait, is he going to… What's he… The male figure's presence alone caused the energy around them to flare. Fear rippled through their forms, not just instinctive, but a response to the alien measure of power hovering above them. Sparks of residual radiation danced along fragments of metal, arcs of light tracing the edges of their weapons and scavenged tools. The smoke of their fires twisted and shivered unnaturally, drawn into faint currents around him. He observed the small human tableau, cataloging tension, fear, hope, and hesitation. Their conversation faltered as their eyes met his, searching for intent in a form that gave nothing. He did not smile, did not frown. He exhaled slightly, though not from need, and the subtle motion of air stirred the camp's dust and smoke, creating a shimmering haze that made their tentative gestures appear larger, more frantic. The boy clutched the metal rod closer, swaying slightly. "Please, please don't hurt us," he whispered. His voice cracked, a brittle sound carried across the acrid scent of campfires. He lowered closer, and the air hummed with the faint static of radiation. Tiny arcs of light played across rusted surfaces and water-stained fabric. The energy from his form intertwined with theirs, creating small, involuntary pulses of heat along the ground. The survivors instinctively recoiled, stepping back, gripping weapons tighter. Their fear was not anger, it was reverence, terror, the sharp edge of instinct recognizing power beyond comprehension. He studied the river's surface, noting the shimmer of residual radiation, the uneven currents carrying decay downstream. A half-buried metal pipe jutted from the riverbank, its surface crackling with ionized energy. He traced its flow with a subtle motion of his hand, observing how the contaminated water threaded through the sediment, how the humans' makeshift pumps struggled against the invisible force. The woman's hand shook as she gestured again, pointing toward the far bank. If we could cross, if you helped, just for a moment." His gaze lingered on the energy signatures of their bodies, the tension in muscles, the rapid heartbeat patterns, the tiny shocks of fear running along nerves. He could act. Every instinctive motion of the river, every contaminated flow, every danger could be neutralized. And yet the energy of survival, the raw calculus of life and choice, demanded restraint. Intervention here would erase not only danger, but purpose. A loud clang echoed from a discarded metal crate, startling the survivors. The boy stumbled back, the man's rifle shaking, the woman exhaling a breath sharp with anxiety. The figure hovering above them did not move. He catalogued the chaos, the arcs of fear, the fluttering of decision, the minor victories and failures unfolding in real time, and allowed them to resolve on their own, invisible yet profoundly present. The campfires continued to hiss and smoke, the chemical tang of radiation twisting in the morning air. The river flowed dark and heavy, carrying unseen poisons downstream, and above it all he hovered, an observer, a singular anomaly recording the patterns of human life, both fragile and resilient, without interference. The city lay in ruin, half swallowed by sand, skeletal buildings jutting into the pale sky like broken teeth. Streets cracked open in long, jagged fissures, littered with the rusted husks of vehicles, their frames warped by heat and time. The male figure moved above the streets, drifting silently, the air around him bending, light twisting in faint arcs along his body. He descended to the cracked pavement, the sound of sand crunching faintly beneath his feet, or rather beneath the minute vibrations his presence stirred. Dust swirled in irregular eddies, catching on jagged metal and broken glass. Each movement he made sent subtle pulses through the cityscape, minor shifts in energy he could see as arcs of faint light tracing the fractures in steel beams and concrete walls. He paused in the center of what had once been a plaza. A rusted statue lay toppled, its head half buried in sand, one arm extended toward the sky as if still frozen in a gesture of warning. The glow of residual radiation clung to the metal in subtle streaks, shimmering in the distorted light around him. He extended a hand and let the sand lift in fine spirals, sifting through debris as if reading layers of history embedded in the ground. Beneath the sand, the outline of a pre-war terminal emerged. Broken screens and corroded control panels half buried in rubble hummed faintly with residual energy. He traced the circuits with subtle motion, guiding small arcs of electricity along the damaged wires, coaxing systems into momentary life. Sparks leapt from twisted metal, a miniature storm dancing across the jagged edges of the terminal. The smell of scorched metal and dust burned faintly in the air, sharp against the heat radiating from sun-baked surfaces. As he worked, a distant noise rose above the wind, a metallic screech, sharp and uneven like steel dragged over stone. He tilted his head, eyes tracing energy signatures moving toward the plaza. 3 figures emerged from the ruins, humanoid but ragged, their weapons fashioned from scrap metal and jagged pipe. Raiders, their energy flows jagged and chaotic, fear and aggression spiking in quick, uneven pulses. One shouted, a harsh, rasping voice carried by the wind. "Hey, what's that light? You stealing from us?" He observed them without motion. The air around him hummed faintly, arcs of static reacting to his presence. The raiders hesitated, stepping closer, weapons lifted. Sparks from exposed metal scattered along the sand, tiny arcs connecting to energy residuals he had stirred. Their fear surged, almost tangible in the heat of the moment, but he remained still, cataloging every twitch, every step, every irregular heartbeat. The leader lunged, a pipe raised high, but the male figure did not flinch. Instead, a subtle gesture of his hand nudged the air currents. Sand swirled, whipping up into a low wall of dust that briefly obscured the raiders' vision. Their screams cut through the hiss of wind as he manipulated a toppled metal beam, guiding it to block their path without touching them. The clang of metal scraping metal echoed sharply, reverberating through the hollowed streets. The raiders stumbled, confusion and anger flashing in their movements. One swung a chain at the dust wall, striking empty air, and the sound of scraping metal against metal ricocheted in staccato bursts. He tilted his head, observing the pattern of chaos he had initiated, not for harm, but to measure response. Each pulse of fear, each frantic adjustment, traced itself in arcs of energy he could see, weaving a tapestry of tension and instinct. A second raider backed into a crumbling wall, dislodging a beam that screeched as it scraped the pavement. Dust cascaded down like tiny clouds, mingling with the metallic tang of oxidized iron in the air. Sparks from residual radiation flickered across the wall's jagged surface, responding to the disturbance he had created. The subtle vibration underfoot, the crunch of sand and rubble, the hiss of metal under stress, all of it composed a symphony of interaction he catalogued in silent precision. Despite his control, he did not remove the threat entirely. He allowed the raiders to stumble and regroup, their chaos contained but their agency intact. Observation and intervention balanced delicately. Creation of an obstacle without direct destruction. The energy arcs between the rubble, the sand, and the raiders themselves formed a complex lattice, a living map of consequence that he could manipulate, but chose not to dominate fully. The leader of the raiders cursed, spitting into the dust. "Damn that, whatever you are." He waved the pipe wildly, scanning the plaza for the light source. The other two shuffled uncertainly, their movements jerky, energy flows fluctuating wildly. Sparks continued to flicker from broken terminals and exposed beams, highlighting their fear in sharp, broken patterns. The male figure lowered his gaze to the terminal. With a subtle motion, he guided one of the buried control panels upright, revealing hidden circuitry that hummed faintly with latent energy. Sparks arced along wires like veins of blue fire. The raiders froze, unsure whether to attack or retreat, their fear radiating visibly. He observed their hesitation as a human might watch a chessboard, noting patterns of thought, instinct, and emotional response without judgment. The wind shifted, lifting more sand into the air, carrying the metallic tang of the city ruins. The screech of metal, the subtle hum of residual radiation, the faint chemical scent of scorched electronics, all coalesced into a tangible tension. He catalogued it, measured it, and allowed it to exist in perfect equilibrium with his presence. The vault yawned before him like a gash in the earth, its metal doors rusted and warped. Inside, water pooled across the floor in shallow, stagnant sheets, reflecting fractured lights from flickering fluorescence overhead. The air was thick with the tang of chemicals, antiseptic long degraded, mingled with the sour rot of decaying flesh, a smell so pungent it seemed almost tactile against his perception. He stepped lightly over puddles, the water rippling unnaturally around his presence. Each reflection refracted the distorted light that clung to his form. Broken tables lined the walls, littered with shattered vials, cracked syringes, and papers warped by moisture. Faint arcs of residual energy traced the outlines of experiments frozen in time, glowing dimly along the edges of shattered glass. He knelt beside a long metal table, his fingers hovering above a tray of vials containing fragmented human DNA. The liquid shimmered faintly, iridescent in the dim light. Each strand held within it the residue of lives lost, memories, errors, diseases, hopes, codified in patterns of energy that only he could fully perceive. He traced the threads carefully, nudging microscopic particles with precise gestures, testing the flow of potential reconstruction. A first subject materialized, a figure half-formed, skin mottled and translucent, muscles misaligned, features grotesquely stretched. It gasped without breath, eyes blinking too fast, a body trying desperately to conform to patterns it no longer remembered. He observed, catalogued, noting the irregularities in energy flow, the dissonance between intention and outcome. The chemical tang of stagnant water mingled with a sharper, metallic stench from broken equipment. Every breath of air, or rather every simulated inhalation he registered, carried the residue of antiseptic, decayed tissue, and ozone from residual electricity. The first subject's limbs twitched erratically, its posture unstable. It was alive, yet the very act of existence seemed to resist coherence. He extended a hand, brushing it through the air above the figure. Energy rippled, faint arcs connecting him to the malformed subject, tracing the misaligned DNA strands in a dance of light. The figure shuddered violently, muscles spasming in impossible directions. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, Saliva and fluid bubbles formed in impossible patterns along jagged teeth. The male figure tilted his head, cataloging the response without judgment. Pure observation, pure measurement. Another subject followed, emerging from the liquid in a half-formed spasm. This one fared slightly better, features more aligned, but its eyes glowed faintly with a chaotic, unformed consciousness. He noted the residual energy signatures of fear, pain, and confusion, all coiling in patterns that suggested understanding without comprehension. The chemical scent of the lab intensified as the water splashed against broken metal, and the antiseptic reacted with decaying organic matter. He paused, absorbing the scene. A tableau of human reconstruction gone awry. Limbs misaligned, torsos twisted, faces malformed yet vaguely familiar. Each pulse of life radiated in jagged, broken arcs, creating a lattice of energy that reflected both fragility and potential. He could intervene, reshape them, force coherence. But the ethical calculus was simple in his perception. Coherence would erase trial and error, remove unpredictability, remove autonomy, even in its grotesque form. The third subject emerged from the tray, almost complete, but its spine arched backward at an unnatural angle, its head tilted too far, jaw opening in a silent shriek. He noted the minute trembling of tissues as energy adjusted to life, the chemical tang rising from its wet skin, mingling with the stagnant water and decayed antiseptic. The water rippled around him subtly, reflecting the arcs of radioactive energy he emitted, refracting in sharp, broken patterns. A sudden splash reverberated from the far side of the lab. A shelf collapsed, jars of residual chemicals and fluids shattering, releasing a sharper, acrid stench. The surviving figures recoiled slightly, energy spikes radiating in response to the new stimulus. He catalogued it all: cause, effect, reaction. Observation and consequence intertwined like the DNA strands he manipulated. Despite the grotesque mutations, he did not retreat. He knelt, focusing on the energy signatures of each subject, fine-tuning minor adjustments. Muscles aligned fractionally. DNA strands pulsed more coherently, but only just enough to preserve chaotic vitality. Each subject remained fundamentally flawed, a testament to the limits of reconstruction in a world decayed. The water rippled faintly, catching the arcs of light tracing the experimental lattice, while the smell of decay, chemicals, and ozone wrapped the space like a tangible fog. He moved through the lab, watching them struggle to stand, observing the clash between innate instinct and imperfect form. Each twitch, each spasm, each faintly aware glance radiated energy that he could trace, map, and measure. He exhaled lightly, noting the rhythm of chaos, the intersection of life, power, and ethical restraint. The tunnels stretched like the veins of a buried beast, narrow and winding, their walls slick with damp condensation. A sulphurous stench rose from fissures in the stone, mingling with the sharp tang of ozone from long-decayed power conduits. The male figure drifted above the tunnel floor, light bending subtly around his form, illuminating wet rock and rusted rebar in jagged, fractured patterns. Water pooled in uneven patches, reflecting faint, ghostly glows from cracks where residual radiation seeped through. Tiny motes of dust and irradiated spores floated in the stagnant air, dancing in eddies stirred by the currents of his presence. The smell was thick, almost suffocating, a layered mix of mold, decay, and the faint chemical tang of electricity lingering in metal pipes. From deeper in the tunnel, movement shivered along the edges of his vision. Shadows shifted unnaturally, jagged forms slinking between puddles and fallen debris. A low, wet growl echoed, vibrating through stone and water alike. He tilted his head, perceiving the creatures not just as bodies, but as lattices of energy, patterns of aggression, hunger, and fear intertwined in unpredictable loops. The first creature emerged, a quadruped twisted with mutation. Its skin was mottled, translucent in patches, muscles misaligned, bones visible beneath thin membranes. Eyes glowed faintly, reflecting his light in broken, erratic arcs. It hissed, saliva dripping from a jagged maw, the stench of decay mingling with the sulphurous tunnel air. He hovered above the floor, observing. Every twitch, every snap of claw on stone, every hiss traced its energy signature. He could intervene instantly, reshape it, neutralize its aggression, or let it act. Its intention was raw and unfiltered, a test of instinct against the unknown. A second creature emerged from the shadows, larger, with spindly limbs and a broken spine. It sloshed through water, leaving shallow ripples, its clawed appendages striking puddles with a sharp splash that echoed against the tunnel walls. The sound was jarring, a wet screech of flesh and metal scraping stone. He noted the vibration, tracing the flow of energy from the creature's nervous systems into the environment. They approached one another, circling, low hisses blending into the tunnel's ambient hum. He allowed them to interact, observing the subtle dances of dominance, aggression, and hesitation. Sparks of residual radiation arced along metallic debris in response to the energy shifts, tiny flashes reflecting in puddles. He catalogued the flow, noting each spike of fear, each flicker of aggression, the chaotic interplay of instinct and mutation. From deeper within the tunnel, more movement arose. Smaller forms scuttled along walls and ceilings, pale, slick, eyeless. They sniffed the air with twitching snouts, bodies vibrating with a raw, instinctual energy he could trace as clearly as if reading open text. The smell of wet stone, mold, and decayed tissue thickened, tangling with the faint electric tang from broken wiring overhead. The quadruped hissed, lunging at one of the smaller creatures. A low clash of limbs and wet strikes resonated through the tunnel, splashes of stagnant water rising with the impact. He tilted his head, cataloging each movement with precision. The tension along spines, the shift in weight, the microsecond flicker in nerve patterns that indicated intent to kill or flee. The fight resolved in moments, both creatures stepping back, energy patterns flickering in exhaustion. He descended closer, allowing the creatures to sense his presence. One turned its glowing eye toward him, energy signature spiking. Its growl reverberated low and throaty, vibrating through the tunnel and making the water tremble subtly. He observed the spike in detail, pulse of fear, calculation of threat, the raw measure of instinct against an incomprehensible power. Another scuttler on the ceiling hissed and leapt down, claws scraping stone, its body slick with moisture. Sparks of faint electricity from exposed conduits arced along the wet stone, illuminating the jagged form for a brief staccato instant. The air vibrated with energy, ozone biting the tang of wet decay, every sound amplified against stone walls. He let the creatures explore the space around him, maintaining distance but allowing the full scope of their behavior to unfold. Energy spikes continued in unpredictable arcs. Their aggression, curiosity, and fear radiated in complex patterns. He catalogued, observed, and measured, noting the interplay between mutation and instinct, environment and consciousness. A deep rumble vibrated through the tunnel as one creature slammed against a fallen metal beam, sending sparks across the puddled floor. The odor of wet metal and decayed flesh intensified, clinging to the stagnant air. The others flinched, circling, but none fled entirely. He noted their energy oscillations, the balance between dominance and retreat, fear and aggression, survival and curiosity. He paused, hovering above a pool of water, observing the lattice of life around him. Each creature moved according to instinct, responding to each other, to the environment, and to his silent presence. The chemical tang, the vibration of whetstone, and the hum of residual radiation formed a sensory map he absorbed entirely. The sun sank low, turning the horizon a bruised orange. The survivor camp along the irradiated river shivered under the evening chill. Fires cracked and hissed, smoke curling into the fading light, tangling with the chemical odor of the water nearby. The metallic tang of the river mixed with scorched wood and the faint stench of cooking over open flames. He drifted above the camp, hovering silently, a calm presence in contrast to the flickering chaos below. Energy patterns radiated outward from the fires and tents, intertwining with the nervous tension of the survivors. Their bodies moved cautiously, muscles tight, eyes scanning the horizon. He could see the flow of their fear, its uneven rhythm, the subtle tremor in their hands as they prepared for the unknown. A sound came from the north, metal scraping against stone, low voices hushed but tense. 3 raiders emerged from the shadowed tree line, silhouettes broken by the flicker of firelight. Weapons raised, makeshift rifles and jagged pipes, their movements deliberate and aggressive. Fear surged through the survivors, their energy flows spiked in sharp, irregular pulses. The woman at the edge of the camp raised her hand, stepping in front of the others. "They're coming! They'll take everything!" Her voice quavered, thick with smoke and the chemical tang of the river. She glanced upward, eyes catching the faint glow of his hovering form. A tremor of hope, fear, and confusion radiated from her energy signature, rippling across the camp. The raiders approached, their boots crunching on cracked sand and scattered debris. Sparks of residual electricity arced from exposed metal in the ground, following the disturbance of energy in the air. One of them swung a pipe, the metallic screech cutting through the hiss of fire and distant river currents. The survivors flinched, stumbling back, energy pulses spiking with panic. He tilted his head, observing. The energy patterns of human aggression were raw, unpredictable, chaotic. The raiders' own flow was jagged, fractured by fear, hunger, and intent. He could intervene, reshape the outcome, disarm them without contact. But his presence alone was a force, subtly influencing decisions without direct action. A raider lunged at a scavenger, swinging a jagged pipe. The man stumbled, dropping a crate of supplies with a clatter that echoed against rusted metal. Fear shot from the survivors in sharp, visible bursts, and sparks danced along exposed iron fragments in response to the chaos. He studied the ripple effects: tension, hesitation, instinctual fight or flight. Every microsecond of panic, every flinch, every heartbeat registered in clear, observable patterns. The woman tried to shield a small boy, pushing him behind a toppled crate. Her energy signature quavered violently, anger and fear mixed in equal measure. She glanced upward at him, the hovering figure above, as if silently pleading for intervention. The tang of smoke and scorched wood stung the air, thickening around her in waves that carried the scent of desperation. He exhaled lightly, a gesture unnecessary but perceptible, and the air around the raiders trembled subtly. Sparks leapt from broken metal fragments, arcs of residual energy tracing along the cracked ground, but he did not directly intervene. Instead, he shifted slightly, nudging the flow of energy in a minor adjustment. The raiders faltered, hesitated mid-strike, confusion radiating outward in jagged pulses. A gunshot cracked, loud and ragged, echoing against the riverbank. The smell of scorched metal mixed with acrid gunpowder, piercing the thick tang of smoke. One raider dropped to the ground, energy arcs leaping faintly from the metal in his hands. The others froze, scanning wildly, unsure where the threat had originated. The survivor's fear spiked, but so did a cautious sense of hope, brief and irregular. He tilted his head, analyzing the flow of consequences. Action here could protect the camp, could prevent injury, could reshape the outcome. Yet to act fully would remove agency from both aggressor and victim, collapsing the natural patterns of decision, fear, and survival. Observation allowed the chaos to unfold, yet he remained an undeniable presence, influencing the smallest of details. The raiders regrouped, shouting over each other, uncertainty radiating invisible waves. Sparks from exposed metal danced, feeding the high tension of the moment, mixing with smoke and ozone. One raider swung a pipe wildly at a survivor, but misjudged, striking a metal crate that toppled and blocked his advance. A hiss of friction and impact echoed sharply, punctuating the chaos. He moved slightly lower, adjusting his hovering angle. The air shimmered faintly, bending light around him, arcs of residual energy tracing paths along the ground and debris. The survivors flinched again, instinctively recoiling, yet finding subtle breathing space in the confusion he silently orchestrated. The boy peeked out from behind the crate, eyes wide, energy spiking with unfiltered fear and tentative awe. A distant metallic crash echoed from the edge of the camp, and the raider's attention wavered. Sparks flickered along jagged metal scraps in the sand. He observed the cascade of cause and effect, the shifting of balance, fear and hesitation, aggression curving back on itself. Every spike of energy, every movement, was measured, recorded, catalogued with precision. The canyon bellowed beneath the storm, fissures in the earth opening wider with each tremor. Dust swirled violently, kicked up by wind that carried the acrid tang of scorched metal and ozone. The river, a blackened vein threading the canyon floor, churned and hissed, bubbling with irradiated steam. Sparks of light leapt from exposed rocks and corroded beams, crackling like miniature lightning strikes. He hovered above it all, the ambient energy bending around him. Every pulse of the storm, every tremor in the earth resonated directly in his perception. The fissures expanded in chaotic arcs, rivers of radioactive energy snaking along jagged rock. The smell of ozone was almost tangible, biting the back of his throat, mingling with the metallic tang of dust and scorched stone. Below, humans scrambled desperately, survivors and scavengers alike, moving in patterns dictated by fear. Their energy spikes radiated panic, each heartbeat visible in jagged pulses. They shouted, voices cracking over the roar of wind and radiation, futile attempts to communicate in the chaos. He extended a hand, not touching, yet the fissures responded. Radiation arcs twisted and bent toward him, obeying the slightest modulation of his presence. Sand lifted into turbulent spirals, forming protective currents around the humans. Sparks of energy leapt between jagged rocks, illuminating the canyon floor in staccato flashes. The storm hummed, higher and sharper than before, vibrating through every particle of rock, sand, and air. A massive fissure cracked near the largest cluster of survivors. Debris tumbled, metal beams groaning as they shifted, threatening to crush makeshift shelters. He moved, lowering slightly, and with a subtle gesture, arcs of energy redirected the falling debris. Sparks arced harmlessly into the air as sand and rock shifted, forming a buffer. The humans froze, wide-eyed, some trembling, some screaming, as if witnessing a god remaking the laws of the canyon. Lightning-like arcs of radiation danced from fissure to fissure. He traced the patterns, redirecting energy flows, stabilizing the tremors, pulling them into harmonic resonance. The hum of the storm intensified, almost musical in its precision, the grit of sand whipping against his form. The canyon's chaos bent under his will, not crushed, not erased, but redirected into controlled patterns. One survivor, a young woman, stumbled into the path of a collapsing beam. Her energy signature spiked violently, terror radiating in jagged pulses. He flicked his hand, not touching her, and the air itself shifted. The beam tilted imperceptibly, narrowly missing her. Sparks flared along exposed metal as the force of his presence realigned gravity and energy around her. She fell to her knees, breathing ragged, the chemical tang of ozone and dust thick in the canyon air. The storm itself seemed alive beneath his observation. Dust and radiation coiled around him, responding to subtle adjustments, following the oscillations of his will. He traced the interaction between matter and energy with precision, the high-pitched hum threading through stone, air, and river alike. Every movement of sand, every spark, every vibration of the fissures was catalogued, measured, corrected, orchestrated. A deep roar came from the canyon floor, a fissure widening, spewing clouds of irradiated gas. Humans coughed, shielding faces against the chemical sting. He lowered slightly, gesturing. The toxic cloud bent, curling around them rather than through. Sparks arced across the surface of rocks, bright, irregular, dancing in rhythm with his control. The survivors staggered, eyes wide, some whispering prayers, others simply frozen in awe. He hovered above, surveying the transformed chaos. The fissures still existed, still hummed, but they no longer threatened immediate destruction. Energy flows that once tore unpredictably through rock and debris now moved in harmonious loops, a lattice of controlled radiation arcs. Sparks lit the canyon walls like veins of electricity. Sand whipped into spiraling currents around the humans, forming protective arcs. One young boy reached a hand upward as if wanting to touch him. Fear and hope collided in sharp, jagged pulses visible in his energy signature. He observed, detached but aware. He could have lifted him, healed him, rendered him untouchable, but intervention would erase the fragile balance. The lesson of survival and adaptation in a chaotic world. He let the boy stand on his own, shielded indirectly by currents of air and arcs of energy. The high-pitched hum of radiation began to stabilize, coiling into long, even arcs that crisscrossed the canyon walls. Sparks flared in rhythm, illuminating terrified yet unharmed humans below. The chemical tang of ozone and irradiated dust mixed with the acrid smoke of fires, creating a sensory web thick and palpable, anchoring every microsecond of observation. He hovered still, absorbing the lattice of energy he had created. Chaos was no longer immediate threat, but survival remained in the hands of those below. The canyon hummed quietly now, dust and sparks slowly settling, the storm's intensity modulated into equilibrium. Yet he knew this display of power was a crossing. Once fully engaged, fully intervening, the point of no return had been reached. Observation alone was impossible. Twilight draped the canyon in bruised purples and muted gold. Shadows stretching across jagged fissures now held in fragile equilibrium. The fires still hissed softly, embers glowing like tiny dying stars along toppled beams and shattered barricades. Smoke curled in thin ribbons, acrid and heavy, mixing with the lingering chemical tang of ozone and irradiated dust. He floated above the canyon floor, the soft hum of residual radiation vibrating subtly beneath him. Sparks from exposed metal arcs continued to flicker in the settling debris, responding to the slight shifts in air and energy around him. Every crack of wood or metallic scrape registered as a pulse of motion in his perception. Survivors emerged cautiously from their hiding places, eyes wide, bodies tense. Some carried burns, cuts, and bruises from the storm's chaos, though none fatal. They shuffled over broken sand and twisted metal, unsure whether to approach or flee. The woman who had pleaded with him before stepped forward, hesitating at the edge of a protective arc of energy he had left, smoke curling around her hair. They saved us," she whispered, voice trembling, a mixture of awe and fear coloring every syllable. Her energy spike was irregular, jagged, oscillating between relief and terror, mirroring the rhythm of the canyon itself. He observed silently. His gaze catalogued the patterns of their movement, their postures, their expressions. Fear radiated still, interwoven with the raw pulse of hope, a lattice of human emotion more complex than any energy flow he had encountered before. Sparks of residual radiation traced the outlines of their forms, dancing along metal and stone, illuminating each micro-expression. A young boy stepped forward, clutching a scrap of metal he had wielded as a weapon. His small frame trembled, energy flaring in jagged bursts of panic. Are you a god?" His question was almost literal, though born of instinct, fear, and awe combined. The chemical tang of the air, smoke, and ozone seemed to thicken around him, accentuating the sharpness of the moment. He tilted his head slightly, not answering, not needing to. Observation was sufficient. The boy's pulse slowed imperceptibly, though the jagged edges of awe and fear remained, weaving a delicate pattern of energy that radiated outward. The survivors watched the interaction, murmuring among themselves, uncertainty and tentative relief threading through every gesture. Some moved closer, drawn by curiosity despite lingering fear. A man with a charred sleeve of clothing stepped into the open, eyes narrowed against the smoke, muscles tense, energy spiking with suspicion. He shouted, voice hoarse, "You! What are you? How did you do this?" The male figure remained suspended, light reflecting off the smoldering canyon floor, arcs of faint sparks following his form. He observed the human's attempt to assert dominance, noting the energy spikes of anger and fear as both merged and diverged. Intervention could be effortless, instantaneous, yet the subtle push and pull of consequence held him in place. Around him the canyon exhaled faintly, small tremors, the settling of dust and debris, tiny sparks continuing along jagged metal. The smell of scorched earth and wood lingered, biting at perception, weaving into the low hum of residual radiation. Every flicker of flame, every curl of smoke, every tremor of sand spoke to him of fragility, resilience, and consequence. The woman finally stepped closer, her eyes wide but resolute. We owe you our lives," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Her energy flowed in jagged arcs, tracing a path of gratitude and fear intertwined. The survivors glanced at one another, murmurs spreading, each pattern of human emotion reflected in subtle sparks of energy around them. He observed them all, sensing the weight of responsibility pressing, faint but undeniable. Intervention had altered the natural flow, even if gently, and the moral calculus of action versus observation pressed against him like a tangible weight. The canyon, still trembling faintly, reflected the energy of survival, awe and fear all in harmonic dissonance. A faint pop from a settling metal beam drew his gaze. Sparks flickered, the acrid tang of scorched metal and ozone sharpening in the air. He tilted his head, noting the intricate interplay between physical consequence and human reaction. Each movement, each energy spike, each inhalation of smoke and dust was recorded in precise clarity. The survivors began to move more freely, though still wary. A small girl, bandaged arm swinging loosely, approached the boy who had first spoken, eyes darting toward him and then upward to the hovering figure. Their tentative curiosity mingled with residual fear, each step creating ripples of energy he could trace, each pulse of life measured in detail. He exhaled faintly, imperceptibly, feeling the subtle flow of consequence he had initiated. The canyon hummed in response, settling into a fragile equilibrium. Yet he understood, once engaged, fully acting upon the world, retreat into mere observation was impossible. He had crossed the threshold, and the weight of that choice pressed in a quiet, inexorable way. The city outskirts stretched before him like a graveyard of pre-war ambition. Half-collapsed buildings leaned precariously, windows shattered, walls mottled with rust and soot. The streets were littered with debris, fragments of concrete, rusted cars with missing doors, the skeletal remains of playgrounds half swallowed by sand. A faint wind carried the acrid tang of scorched metal, mixed with a bitter chemical smell of lingering radiation. He descended slowly, hovering above the cracked asphalt. Every step he made, or rather every slight movement in the air around him, sent micro-vibrations across the streets. Tiny disturbances in the dust and sand. Sparks of residual energy flickered along metal beams and broken street signs, responding subtly to his presence. From a distant alley came shouting, low and jagged. Raider gangs clashed with each other and with scavenging survivors, voices hoarse and desperate, energy spikes jagged and chaotic. The male figure observed from above, cataloging the lattice of fear, aggression, and survival instinct. Patterns of cause and effect unfolded with each movement. A crate toppled, sending a cascade of rusted cans across the street. A raider swung a pipe, narrowly missing a survivor. A small fire ignited in debris, sending smoke curling upward. The survivors moved cautiously, bodies tense, every step measured. They carried bundles of scavenged supplies, eyes darting toward both the raiders and him, the hovering anomaly whose previous interventions had reshaped the canyon and, indirectly, these outskirts. The chemical tang of ozone from distant residual radiation cut through the burnt metallic scent of debris. One survivor, a man with a tattered coat, shouted at the raiders, trying to corral them from attacking his small group. "Back off! There's enough for all of us!" His voice trembled, edged with both authority and panic. Energy radiated from him in jagged arcs, hope and fear intertwined in sharp, irregular pulses. Two raiders turned towards him, faces twisted in fury. One swung a jagged piece of rebar, sparks dancing as it scraped against a rusted pipe. The survivor ducked, stumbling over uneven rubble, dust rising in choking clouds. He glanced up at the hovering figure, a fleeting, silent plea visible in the spike of energy radiating outward. The male figure tilted his head, cataloging each motion. Every misstep, every flash of fear, every arc of aggression was visible in perfect clarity. He could intervene, neutralize the raiders instantly, reshape the debris to protect the humans. But each action carried consequences. Intervention here might save them, yes, but it could also disrupt the fragile ecosystem of survival already in motion. A low growl echoed from a ruined parking structure. Mutated wildlife, pale and spindly, with eyes glowing faintly from radiation exposure, emerged from shadows. They slithered and scuttled, claws scraping concrete, bodies slick with wet decay. Sparks arced from exposed metal along their path, the chemical tang of ozone mingling with a sharper stench of decayed flesh. Humans flinched, panic radiating, energy spikes jagged and irregular. He hovered closer, observing interactions. A raider swung wildly at one of the mutated creatures, misjudging its path. Sparks flew from metal and concrete as the attack missed, debris scattering. The creature hissed, jerking its malformed limbs, energy pulsing violently. The humans flinched, stumbling over rubble, dust clouding the air with the acrid chemical tang of panic and fallout. The male figure extended a hand slightly, tracing arcs of energy to subtly redirect the creature's path, nudging them away from humans without direct contact. The mutants obeyed partially, swerving in narrow corridors of their own choosing, while the raiders reacted unpredictably to the shift. Chaos remained, but contained in a delicate, balanced lattice. A small group of survivors edged forward, carrying water containers and scavenged tools. Their energy flows flickered nervously as they navigated broken streets, eyes darting between hostile raiders, mutated wildlife, and the hovering figure above. Sparks of residual radiation traced along the jagged metal of the streets and collapsed buildings, reflecting their collective fear and determination. One of the raiders, taller and wiry, swung a chain wildly at the humans. Sparks flew from metal striking metal, the noise reverberating across the shattered streets. Dust and ash rose, clinging to the chemical tang of ozone and scorched earth. The humans stumbled, momentarily frozen, energy spikes jagged, then scattered to take cover behind debris. He tilted his head, noting the cumulative effect of his previous interventions. The canyon disaster, the stabilizations, the ripple effects now extending into this urban sprawl. His presence altered the environment subtly, arcs of energy bending debris and nudging mutants, yet the human struggle remained raw and visceral. The man with the tattered coat reached a small plateau of rubble and shouted again, voice hoarse, "Everyone, regroup! Use the debris for cover!" Sparks from falling metal highlighted desperate, haphazard movements. The survivors obeyed, guided by instinct and desperation, each step sending micro-tremors through the debris-strewn streets. He hovered silently, observing every micro-motion, every spike of fear, every flicker of hope. The chemical tang of scorched metal and ozone thickened in the air. Every inhalation, if he could perceive it as a human would, anchoring him in the reality of fragile human life intertwined with radiation, chaos, and the unpredictable consequences of power. The city core lay in ruin, skyscrapers skeletal, their shattered facades jagged against a sky thick with dust and radiation haze. Streets cracked open in long, uneven fractures, their surfaces littered with debris, twisted rebar, shattered concrete, and the charred remains of vehicles. Fires smoldered in scattered heaps, smoke curling in dark, acrid streams that carried the tang of metal and burning wood. He hovered above the chaos, observing. Human life, fractured, desperate, violent, wove itself through the city like veins of erratic energy. Two survivor factions clashed in the streets below, weapons raised, rusted pipes, jagged metal, crude firearms. Energy spikes erupted from each combatant. Fear, aggression, and determination interwoven into jagged lattices of cause and consequence. A scream split the air, sharp and raw. A man was struck by a pipe, stumbling backward, blood spraying onto cracked asphalt. The metallic tang of iron mixed with ozone and smoke, clinging to the back of his perception. The humans below flinched at the sight, energy spikes spiking sharply in reaction. He tilted his head, observing the flow of conflict. Intervention was trivial. He could neutralize weapons, disarm both factions, or even lift the combatants into safety. Yet the very calculus of morality, his godlike presence altering the balance of survival, pressed against him. Observation alone was no longer a choice. To act even indirectly carried irreversible weight. A small girl stumbled into the fray, clutching a scrap of metal she hoped could protect her. Her energy signature flared violently, fear spiking like a jagged pulse in the chaos. A raider swung a pipe toward her, eyes wide, intent, unhesitating. He exhaled lightly, and the arc of energy surrounding him shifted minutely. The pipe's trajectory bent, missing the girl by inches. Sparks flared from exposed metal as debris scraped asphalt, the acrid smell of burnt metal and chemical ozone filling the air. The factions froze briefly, scanning the streets, confusion radiating in jagged bursts. Another combatant swung a gun, firing toward an enemy, and the bullet struck a toppled metal sign, sending sparks and shrapnel flying. He shifted slightly, subtly nudging the path of energy. The bullets fell harmlessly to the ground, arcs of static crackling along metal fragments and fractured asphalt. The human's energy flows oscillated between fear, awe, and bewilderment. A fire ignited on a nearby vehicle, flames licking the metal surface. The smell of burning oil, ozone, and scorched flesh mingled, thick and pungent. He traced arcs of energy along the edges of the flames, nudging them toward harmless dispersion, diffusing danger while leaving the humans intact. Sparks danced along twisted metal, highlighting faces twisted in shock, relief, and awe. One man, chest bleeding from a pipe strike, stumbled toward a survivor huddled behind debris. His energy signature flared sharply, rage, desperation, and fear coalescing in chaotic bursts. The hovering figure shifted, and the air around the man bent imperceptibly. He tripped over a small pile of rubble, tumbling harmlessly, energy arcs guiding his fall without direct contact. The acrid tang of smoke and blood filled the canyon of streets around them, a sensory anchor to the human chaos below. Another group of combatants advanced, weapons raised, unaware of the subtle currents nudging their motions. Sparks leapt from broken metal, arcs connecting to exposed wiring in collapsed buildings. The smell of ozone sharpened, biting against the chemical tang of blood and smoke. His presence was unmistakable. Power absolute, observable yet ungraspable, bending reality without ever touching it. The girl from before scrambled toward safety, slipping on debris-strewn asphalt. Her energy signature spiked again, terror radiating outward. He extended a hand subtly, guiding arcs of energy beneath her, lifting her fractionally to prevent injury. She stumbled to her feet, wide-eyed, then glanced upward, witnessing him fully for the first time. Fear, awe, and unspoken gratitude radiated in chaotic arcs across the street. A raider swung a metal pipe at a survivor carrying water and supplies. Sparks flew as metal met metal, but the weapon's arc curved mid-swing, striking only the cracked asphalt. The acrid tang of ozone intensified, mingled with the metallic stench of blood and sweat. The survivor froze, eyes wide, energy spike jagged and irregular. Around them, chaos continued, each interaction moderated subtly by the hovering figure. He paused above the battlefield, cataloging the outcomes. Every life spared, every injury avoided, every ripple of fear and awe traced in arcs of energy, visible only to him. Yet the weight of intervention pressed in, undeniable. To act fully was to impose order, to remove agency, but to remain distant risked unnecessary loss of life. He had crossed the threshold. Observation was no longer neutral. Power had irrevocably engaged with consequence. Ash drifted downward in slow, uneven flakes, settling onto broken asphalt and twisted steel. Fires that had raged minutes earlier now whispered and crackled, their heat reduced to a dull glow beneath collapsed beams. The air carried the dry, metallic taste of dust and old smoke, sharp against the tongue, coating every breath. Somewhere a sheet of corrugated metal ticked as it cooled, each sound spaced too far apart, too deliberate. He hovered above the street, motionless. Below him the survivors began to move, not with panic, not yet with relief, but with caution. Boots scraped against rubble. Someone coughed, deep and wet. A woman dragged a wounded man out from behind an overturned bus, the smear of blood on the pavement already darkening as ash settled into it. Energy patterns shifted. Fear no longer spiked sharply. Instead, it spread evenly, a low, constant hum woven through every human nearby. He perceived it immediately. This was different from the canyon, different from the camp. They were no longer afraid of what might happen. They were afraid of him. A man stepped forward into the open street, his weapon discarded somewhere behind him. His shoulders were squared, jaw clenched so tightly the muscles quivered. "It's because of him," he said, voice carrying in the hollow space between ruined buildings. All of it stopped because he wanted it to. A murmur rippled outward, agreement, unease, anger. Another voice answered, sharper. "He saved us. You'd be dead if not for him." "That's the problem," the first man snapped. "We only live if he decides." The word struck with more force than any weapon. He felt the shift ripple through the gathered humans. Energy patterns fracturing, recombining. Fear braided with resentment now. Dependence curdling into something unstable. He lowered slightly, boots never touching the ground, ash lifting in a faint halo beneath him. The movement drew every eye. A woman dropped to her knees. It wasn't slow or ceremonial. Her legs simply gave out. Ash puffed around her palms as they struck the ground. "Please," she said, voice breaking, "please don't leave. If you go, they'll come back. Someone always comes back." Her energy burned hot, desperation raw and unfiltered. Another survivor recoiled, dragging a child behind him. "Don't look at him," he hissed. "Don't let him notice you." He noticed everything. The city had quieted, but tension replaced noise. Fires popped softly. Wind pushed ash along the street in thin, whispering lines. Somewhere high above, loose glass clinked faintly in a shattered frame. He observed himself reflected in a bent storefront window, light warped, form indistinct. He had not changed, but their perception of him had solidified into something rigid and dangerous. A Brotherhood of Steel knight emerged from between two collapsed buildings, power armor scorched and dented, laser rifle lowered but not slung. The insignia on his shoulder was half melted but recognizable. He stared up, helmet lenses glowing faintly. "You're not a weapon," the knight said, voice amplified, controlled. "Weapons get aimed, you don't." Behind him, a paladin whispered something into a wrist-mounted radio, static crackling in reply. From the opposite side of the street, a man in a battered vault jumpsuit, numbers nearly rubbed away, laughed softly, the sound edged and wrong. "Doesn't matter what he is," the man said. "Only matters whether he chooses us next time." The factions that had fought minutes earlier now stood intermingled, weapons lowered, eyes lifted, raiders, settlers, brotherhood, vault dwellers. Even a pair of ghouls lingered near the shadows, their ruined faces unreadable, but their energy patterns taut with alertness. All important, all fragile, all watching. He understood then. Intervention had collapsed, distanced. There would be no returning to anonymity, no silent hovering beyond consequence. His presence alone now shaped decisions. Fear organized itself around him. A child picked up a piece of warm metal from the ground and dropped it with a yelp. The sound echoed too loudly. Several people flinched. He felt the weight, not physical, not emotional as humans understood it, but structural. A pressure in the lattice of possibility. Every future here bent slightly toward him whether he acted or not. He could leave, instantly. The city would resume its natural entropy. Conflict would return. Survival would reassert its brutal equilibrium. Or he could stay. The woman on her knees looked up, ash streaking her face. "Just don't decide we're not worth it," she said. He did not answer. Ash continued to fall. Fires continued to die. The city held its breath around him. The Brotherhood command post squatted at the city's edge like a fortified scar. Sandbags stacked chest-high formed narrow corridors between metal barricades. Floodlights cast harsh white cones across the rubble, illuminating drifting ash and the angular silhouettes of power armor. Generators thudded rhythmically, a low mechanical pulse that vibrated through the ground and into every metal surface. He hovered above the perimeter without crossing it. The air here tasted different. Hot oil, ozone, and dust baked by radiation and machinery. The hum of electricity threaded through everything, a constant, disciplined sound that contrasted sharply with the organic chaos of the city behind him. Knights moved with purpose. Orders were shouted, clipped, and precise. Servo motors whined as armored figures took positions behind mounted weapons. A scribal unit hunched over terminals, green text flickering across cracked screens. Every motion formed a tight lattice of intent, fear buried beneath training and protocol. He saw it immediately, the attempt to make him legible. A paladin stepped forward, helmet lenses fixed on him. The paladin's posture was rigid, rehearsed. "Unidentified entity," the amplified voice boomed, echoing off metal and concrete. "You are within proximity of Brotherhood operations. State your origin and intent." The words were formal, but the energy signature beneath them spiked violently. He did not respond. The silence stretched. Generators drummed. A cable sparked near a barricade, the smell of burnt insulation cutting through hot oil and dust. The paladin shifted weight almost imperceptibly, recalculating. Behind him, a scribe whispered urgently, "Energy readings are spiking again. He's not emitting radiation like anything we've catalogued." "Is it a pre-war weapon?" another voice hissed. "No, weapons don't look back at you." He lowered slightly. Floodlights bent around his form, their beams warping, refracting, refusing to settle. The metal plating of nearby armor vibrated faintly, a subtle resonance traveling through bolts and joints. The paladin raised a hand. "Hold fire," he said, though no one had aimed yet. A mounted laser turret rotated a few degrees anyway. Its servos whined softly, a sound thin and nervous. He observed the systems, targeting arrays, energy capacitors, kill zones mapped in overlapping arcs. The Brotherhood's confidence was architectural, built from layers of redundancy and firepower, designed for enemies that could be overwhelmed. This was not one of those enemies. A knight muttered, "If it bleeds." "It won't," another cut in sharply. The air shimmered as he drifted closer to the edge of the light. The ozone scent intensified, sharp and clean, mixing with hot metal and oil. Loose grit lifted from the ground, rattling softly against armor plates. A scribe dropped a data slate. It clattered against steel decking, the sound ringing too loud. No one laughed. "Paladin," the scribe said, voice tight, "if he wanted us gone, this place would already be a hole in the ground." The paladin said nothing. His energy pattern tightened, looping inward, calculation, not panic. Control struggling to reassert itself. "We are not your enemy," the paladin said finally. "The Wasteland needs order. If you're capable of shaping outcomes, then—" "You don't speak for him," a voice interrupted. A man in a battered vault jumpsuit stood at the edge of the perimeter, flanked by 2 armed settlers. He shouldn't have been allowed this close. The guards were too focused upward to notice. "He doesn't need your rules," the man continued. "You'll just turn him into another leash." Weapons shifted instantly. Laser rifles raised halfway. The air tightened. He felt it before it happened. The convergence of fear and authority. The moment where someone would make a decision that could not be undone. The turret locked fully. He lifted one hand. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough. Every powered system within the perimeter stalled at once, not destroyed, paused. Servo motors froze mid-whine. Floodlights flickered and dimmed. The generator's hum dropped into a low, uneven cough before stabilizing again. Silence pressed in, thick and absolute. The paladin stared at his gauntlet as its HUD flickered uselessly. "Stand down," he said quietly, to no one in particular. The settlers exhaled shakily. Someone laughed once, hysterical, then stopped. He let the systems resume, slowly, carefully, like returning a weapon after proving you could take it apart without effort. The message was clear. Classification failed. Containment failed. The Brotherhood could only respond, not command. He hovered there, light bending, ash drifting, the smell of hot oil and ozone anchoring the moment in metal and dust. Behind him, the city waited. Ahead of him, order recalibrated. Night did not fall cleanly over the city. It seeped in through cracks and collapsed roofs, pooled in subway entrances, and clung to the undersides of broken overpasses. Fires burned low now, reduced to embers and heat without flame. Candlelight replaced floodlights, small unsteady points of gold trembling against concrete walls stained black by time and radiation. He hovered above a wide plaza once meant for crowds. A statue lay shattered at its center, the stone face split cleanly in half, eyes staring in opposite directions. Around it, people gathered. They did not approach him directly. They formed a circle instead. Candles had been arranged carefully, wax pooled and hardened in uneven rings. The smoke rose thin and gray, carrying the scent of tallow, burned fabric, and damp concrete. Each curl of smoke registered to him as a slow-moving particulate pattern, drifting upward, disturbed by breath, by murmured words, by trembling hands. They spoke quietly at first. He stopped the bullets. He bent the fire. He looked at me. Every sentence carried a spike of energy, hope sharpened by fear. He perceived belief forming the same way pressure formed in stone, incrementally, invisibly, until something fractured. A man stepped forward from the circle. His clothes were clean compared to the rest, washed, patched carefully. He knelt, pressing his forehead to the cracked stone. "Protector," the man said. The word landed heavy, weighted with intention. Others followed. Not all. Some remained standing, arms crossed, faces tight. A woman with burn scars along her neck whispered sharply, "Don't kneel. That's how it starts." The murmurs split. Agreement and anger collided softly like distant thunder. He felt it clearly now, ideology blooming. From the far edge of the plaza, shapes moved with purpose, not worshippers, organizers. They kept to the shadows, near the subway entrance where damp air rose steadily from below, carrying mold, rust, and old water. Their boots scraped softly on concrete slick with condensation. One of them spoke low. "If we let this spread, we're done. No more choices, just whatever he decides." Another replied, You saw what he did to the Brotherhood systems. You think bullets matter? A third voice, tighter, colder. Everything bleeds if you hit it enough times. He turned his attention fully then. Below the plaza, in the subway tunnels, candles had been set into wall niches once meant for advertisements. Chalk symbols marked the tile, circles, lines, abstract attempts to describe him. Children traced the shapes with their fingers, soot smearing their skin. A woman sang softly. Not a song with words, just a low hum, wavering, vibrating against tile and water. The sound traveled upward through the stairwell, mixing with candle smoke and damp air. It brushed against his perception like static. He hovered lower. The electrical vibration in the air intensified, not from machines, but from anticipation, human nervous systems resonating in proximity, fear and reverence feeding each other. In the plaza, a man stood abruptly. "He's not here to save us," he shouted. "If he wanted us safe, the world wouldn't look like this." Silence followed. Candle flames wavered. The kneeling man lifted his head slowly. "Or maybe this is what we were meant to survive," he said, "and he's here to see who's worth it." That word again. Worth. Energy spiked sharply, resentment slicing through the lattice of belief. Several people backed away from the circle entirely. One spat on the ground. From the shadows near the subway entrance, metal clicked softly. A rifle being chambered. He saw the trajectory before the thought fully formed in the shooter's mind. The path of the round, the heat it would generate, the meaningless gesture of defiance wrapped in terror and rage. He did not stop it immediately. The rifle barked once, loud, flat. The sound cracked across the plaza, scattering birds from broken ledges. The bullet tore through candle smoke, slicing wax mid-drip. It would have struck him in the chest. It never reached him. The round slowed, not stopped, its energy unraveling, heat dissipating into the air. It fell to the ground harmless, clinking softly against stone. No explosion, no spectacle, just failure. The plaza erupted. Screams, shouts, people scattering, knocking over candles. Wax spilled across stone, flames guttering out one by one. The smell of hot wax and burned wick surged upward, thick and cloying. "He let it happen," someone cried. "He didn't stop it. He wanted to see." The shooter dropped the rifle and ran. Others followed, fear detonating into motion. Worship collapsed into chaos within seconds. He hovered there, unmoving, absorbing the full shape of the reaction. How belief curdled when confronted, how fear metastasized when power refused to perform. Below ground in the tunnels, the singing stopped. A child began to cry. The candle smoke thickened as air currents shifted. Damp concrete pressed close, amplifying every sound. Footsteps fleeing, sobs echoing, the scrape of a dropped metal charm. He understood now. He was no longer an anomaly. He was a symbol, and symbols did not remain neutral. Some would kneel. Some would raise weapons. Others would build entire structures, belief systems, enemies, futures around his silence. He could dismantle it all with a thought, erase the idea of him, or allow it to grow, mutate, fracture like everything else human. He rose slowly, lifting above the plaza, above the tunnels, above the trembling candles and scattered people. The faint electrical vibration in the air followed him, as if reluctant to let go. Below, someone whispered, "He's watching." They were right. The testing grounds lay flat and exposed. A wide stretch of cracked earth scarred by old blast marks. Concrete bunkers half sunk into the ground formed a broken ring, their entrances dark and jagged. Rusted radar towers leaned at angles that suggested surrender rather than collapse. The wind moved freely here, dry and constant, dragging grit across the surface in thin, rasping sheets. He hovered above the center of it all. Heat shimmered off metal plates and buried cables just beneath the soil. The air carried no smoke now, no candle wax or burned wood, only dust, sun-baked concrete, and the faint metallic odor of old weapons waking from dormancy. They had chosen this place carefully. From the bunkers, figures emerged in coordinated intervals. Brotherhood of Steel knights in full power armor, mercenaries in layered scrap armor, a handful of figures in vault jumpsuits carrying equipment that hummed softly, unevenly, devices never meant to be used this way. Energy signatures flared across the field, tight and disciplined. Fear was present but buried beneath preparation. A command voice crackled over an open channel. "Target stable, capacitors charging." He perceived the weapons before they finished assembling. A salvaged orbital relay dish lay tilted on its side, cables running from it like exposed veins. Pre-war focusing lenses had been scavenged and rebuilt into a crude emitter. The capacitors whined as they filled, a rising pitch that vibrated through the ground and into the bunker's walls. The sound was sharp, unpleasant, determined. He lowered slightly, enough to be unmistakably present. A paladin stepped forward, insignia freshly repainted, voice amplified. "Entity," he called. "This is your final warning. You represent an extinction-level variable. You will submit to containment." Containment. The word pulsed hard, dense with institutional fear. Behind the paladin, a scientist, once enclave, now something less certain, adjusted dials with shaking hands. Sweat darkened the collar of his suit. "This will work," he muttered. "It has to. The math says it has to." The capacitors screamed as energy surged through them. Heat rippled visibly now, warping the air in jagged waves. The wind changed direction slightly, drawn toward the emitter's growing charge. He observed the lattice forming, the intent to annihilate, structured and focused, given physical shape. A voice from a nearby bunker whispered, barely audible, "If this fails..." No one answered. The order came sharply. "Fire!" The weapon discharged with a sound that was not an explosion, but a tearing. Air itself strained and recoiled. A beam of concentrated energy ripped across the testing grounds, scorching the earth in its path, vaporizing grit into glass. It struck him squarely. For a fraction of a second, the humans believed. The beam wrapped around his form, light collapsing inward, energy compressing violently. Heat spiked. Capacitors screamed louder, redlining past tolerance. Then the beam unraveled. Not reflected, not absorbed. Understood. The energy disassembled at a fundamental level, its coherence collapsing into harmless dispersion. The light faded, falling away like mist burned off by sun. Silence followed. The capacitors detonated one by one, not catastrophically, just enough to cripple themselves. Metal warped, cables snapped. The smell of burned insulation and hot oil rushed outward, carried by the wind. A knight dropped to one knee involuntarily as his armor systems failed. HUDs went dark across the field. Power armor locked in place with a chorus of servo whines and abrupt stops. Panic spiked. "He's still there," someone said, voice thin. He had not moved. The dry wind pushed grit against immobilized armor. Heat shimmered, faded as systems died. The testing grounds felt suddenly ancient again, like a place that had already seen this mistake made once before. A mercenary raised a ballistic rifle, purely kinetic. Desperate, he fired. The round disintegrated meters from his hand, metal fragments falling harmlessly into the dust. Someone screamed. Another laughed, sharp and hysterical. The paladin took a step forward despite locked armor, forcing joints with raw strength. "We did this because we had to," he said, voice cracking through the amplifier. "You leave us no choice." That, more than the weapon, was the truth. He descended slowly. The ground beneath him did not crack. Dust lifted, swirling gently, settling again as if reluctant to touch him. He moved through the field, past bunkers and disabled machines, past humans frozen by malfunction or terror. He did not harm them, did not erase them. But every system he passed near went quiet. Radios died mid-transmission. Backup generators stalled. Targeting optics flickered and failed. Control collapsed completely. The scientist sank to his knees, staring at his hands. "We can't stop him," he whispered. He hovered at the center of the ring, surrounded by immobilized force, the dry wind brushing against silent armor and scorched earth. This was not mercy. This was inevitability. They had tried to kill a constant. The highway stretched west in a long, cracked line, its faded lanes barely visible beneath dust and weeds. Overhead signs creaked on rusted bolts, swaying slightly in the wind. Their lettering, warnings, directions, promises had lost authority long ago, but the sound they made still carried. A hollow clatter, irregular like bones knocking. Together, he hovered above the asphalt, motionless. Below, movement unfolded not in panic but in process. Caravans rolled past without stopping. Brahmin carts heavy with scrap and water barrels diverted miles early, wheels groaning as they left the road for rougher ground. Drivers avoided looking up, children were pulled closer, faces pressed into fabric and leather. No one waved, no one shouted. This was not fear in its raw form. This was adjustment. At the edge of a ruined interchange, tents had been erected in loose clusters. Canvas snapped gently in the wind, its rhythm uneven, stitched and restitched too many times. Small fires burned low, fed sparingly. The smell of boiled grain and recycled water drifted upward, thin and cautious. A man in a battered duster spoke quietly to a woman wearing a faded NCR insignia. "We don't go east anymore," he said, "not since he showed up." She nodded without argument. Trade routes shifted south. Rangers confirmed it. Confirmed. He noted the word with interest. Nearby, a radio crackled weakly. A voice pushed through static. 3 dogs' cadence altered by distance and damaged equipment. "And remember, folks, if you see the blue guy, yeah, you know who I mean. You might want to rethink your travel plans. This is Galaxy News Radio, trying to keep you alive." The generator powering the radio coughed, steadied, then coughed again. Its vibration traveled through the dirt and into his perception, a stubborn mechanical heartbeat refusing to stop. Further down the road, a familiar figure leaned against a rusted car door, arms crossed. A trench coat, collar turned up against the wind. Nick Valentine watched the empty stretch of highway, synthetic eyes narrowing slightly as he tracked the absence of traffic. "City's bleeding people," he muttered to no one in particular, "not running, just choosing somewhere else." Piper Wright stood nearby, notebook tucked under her arm. She wasn't writing, she was watching him, hovering, distant, unreadable. "You think he notices?" she asked. Nick didn't answer right away. A loose sign rattled overhead, canvas snapped. Somewhere a child laughed, quickly hushed. "I think," Nick said finally, "that's the point. Folks don't want to matter to him." He did notice. Absence registered as clearly as presence. Trade routes faded like dimming lights. Settlements went dark, not destroyed, just emptied. He perceived homes abandoned mid-routine. Doors left ajar, half-packed crates, meals scraped clean but not finished. In Megaton, lights flickered out one by one, not from attack, from decision. Sheriff Lucas Sims stood at the gate, watching the last caravan leave, hands resting on his belt. "Ain't worth proving a point," he said quietly. "Not this one." In Diamond City, Mayor McDonough issued a calm announcement about temporary relocation efforts. The crowd listened in uneasy silence. No riots, no shouting, just a collective recalibration. Even the Brotherhood adapted. A Pridwin scout circled once at a safe distance, then veered away without comment. Orders filtered down, avoidance zones marked. Engagement protocols erased. He hovered over the highway as dusk deepened. The sky dimmed into muted layers of gray and violet. Wind pushed dust into slow spirals across the asphalt. The sound of a distant generator faded as fuel ran out. This was how they fought him now, by stepping aside. A young boy near the tents stared upward despite his mother's grip. His eyes tracked the stillness above the road. "Is he a god?" the boy asked. The mother tightened her hold. "No," she said quickly, "just something else. Something else." The phrase carried resignation more than fear. Night settled further. Fires burned lower. Radios clicked off one by one. Even the wind seemed to soften as if recognizing the change. He drifted higher, rising above the highway, above the camps, above the thinning lines of human movement. From here the pattern was undeniable. Humanity bending its shape, carving negative space around him. They did not want his help. They did not want his attention. They wanted to continue. And they would, just not where he was. For the first time since arriving, the Wasteland did not push back. It simply moved on. The settlement had not been destroyed. That was the first thing he registered. Doors stood open without force marks. Windows were intact. Wind chimes made from scrap metal still hung on porches, stirring faintly in the evening air. Dust lay undisturbed except for shallow tracks, boot prints, cartwheels, leading outward away. He descended slowly into the center of the street. His feet did not touch the ground, but the hollow echo of motion registered anyway, a phantom rhythm bouncing between buildings. The sound returned to him altered, thinner, as if the town itself had lost the will to answer. Inside one of the houses, a generator hummed. It was weak, inconsistent. The sound wavered every few seconds, a mechanical breath struggling to continue without an audience. A single light bulb flickered in the main room, illuminating a table set for 3. Metal plates, tin cups, a deck of worn cards fanned loosely in the center. He hovered closer. Dust shifted across the floor as air displaced around him. It gathered in the corners, thick and gray, carrying the faint smell of old oil, dry wood, and fabric that had absorbed years of human presence. The textures registered clearly: coarse grains underfoot, splintered edges on furniture, the soft sag of a mattress pressed flat by time. A radio sat on the counter. It clicked on suddenly, startling in the silence. Static, then a voice, familiar, practiced, trying to sound upbeat. "Hey there, wanderers. If you're hearing this, you're probably somewhere you shouldn't be. Or maybe somewhere you just left behind." Three Dog paused, breath audible. "World's changing again, folks. Not exploding this time, just adjusting." The generator coughed. The radio fell silent. He remained where he was. In the back room, a child's drawing lay taped to the wall. Crude lines, stick figures holding hands beneath a large, uneven circle. Someone had written above it in shaky pencil, "Home." He understood the chemical composition of the pencil marks, the decay rate of the tape, the exact number of days since the adhesive had begun to fail. What he did not understand was the ache that registered anyway. Outside, a shadow crossed the doorway. "Didn't think I'd find anyone left," a voice said. He turned. Nick Valentine stood in the doorway, hat low, revolver holstered but ready. His metal frame caught the light briefly, edges worn smooth by years of movement. He looked around the room, then up. "So," Nick said, "this is what emptiness looks like when it doesn't come with a body count." Behind him, dog meat padded in, nails clicking softly on the floor. The dog sniffed the air, ears twitching, tail low but steady. He stopped near the table, nose brushing the cards. Nick followed the dog's gaze. "They left in a hurry," he said, "but not in fear. More like when you know the rain's coming and decide not to get wet." Nick met his eyes. "You planning to say anything?" He did not respond. The generator sputtered again, dimming the light. Dust motes drifted slowly through the air, visible only when the bulb flared briefly brighter. Each particle traced a tiny arc, settling again into stillness. Nick exhaled. "Figures," he muttered. "Whole world's talking about you. You're the quietest one in it." Outside, footsteps approached, lighter, quicker. Piper Wright leaned into the doorway, notebook already open. She froze when she saw the room. "Oh," she said softly, "this one too." She looked at him, then at Nick. No signs of violence, no radiation spike, just gone. Dogmeat whined quietly. Piper swallowed. "People are asking questions, not angry ones, just big ones. Like whether it's worth rebuilding if something like you can just exist." She gestured vaguely at him, then immediately looked uncomfortable. "Sorry, that sounded honest," Nick finished. Piper nodded. "Yeah." Silence pressed in again. The generator finally failed. The hum wound down into nothing. Darkness settled. Not sudden, but complete. He perceived the room without light easily. But the absence still registered as a shift. No flicker, no motion. Just the weight of things left behind. Nick broke the quiet. "You know," he said, "I've been a lot of things. Detective, machine, punchline. One thing I learned, people don't need gods. They need reasons to keep showing up." He adjusted his hat. "Right now, you're giving them reasons not to." Dogmeat sat, ears up, watching him. Piper closed her notebook slowly. "If you're waiting for permission," she said, voice steady despite the tension, "you won't get it. People don't know what to do with you, so they're doing the only thing they can." "What's that?" Nick asked. "Living somewhere else." The words settled heavily. He looked at the drawing on the wall again. The uneven circle, the word home. He could fix this. Repopulate the town. Adjust probabilities. Remove himself entirely. Any number of outcomes branched endlessly in front of him, precise and achievable. But every path that altered them left him unchanged. And that, he understood now, was the variable they were reacting to. Not his power, his distance. Outside, the wind shifted, pushing dust through the street. A loose sign creaked once, then stilled. Nick waited. Piper waited. Dogmeat's tail thumped softly against the floor once. For the first time since arriving in this world, he did not look outward for solutions. He looked inward. Dawn arrived without ceremony. Light crept in sideways, thin and pale, catching on jagged rock and the edges of ruined towers far below. The wasteland stretched outward in uneven layers, cracked earth, scattered structures, roads that faded into nothing. Smoke rose in a few distant places, careful and controlled. Generators coughed awake one by one, their low murmurs stitching together a fragile morning rhythm. He stood on the ridge, feet touching the ground. The contact registered immediately. Pressure, texture, resistance. Gravel shifted under his weight with a soft crunch. Dry grass bent, brittle and sharp against his ankles. Wind moved across his skin, carrying dust and the faint smell of scorched metal mixed with morning chill. This was new. Below him, life resumed cautiously. In the distance, a caravan began to move again. Brahmins snorted, hooves knocking against stone. A guard laughed softly at something said too quietly to carry. The sound traveled upward in pieces broken by terrain, but it reached him all the same. He inhaled. Air filled his lungs unevenly, cool and dry, scraping faintly at the back of his throat. His chest rose, fell. A heartbeat followed. Not simulated, not observed. Present. Behind him, footsteps approached, careful on the loose rock. "You picked a hell of a view," Nick Valentine said. Nick stopped a few paces back, giving space without being asked. His coat fluttered lightly in the wind. Piper Wright stood beside him, notebook tucked under her arm, hair pulled back against the breeze. Dogmeat padded forward, sniffing at the ground, then looked up at him with ears perked. "You're solid," Piper said after a moment. Nick nodded. "Yeah, that's new." He turned slightly, meeting their eyes at the same level. The wind pressed between them, moving scrubgrass and shallow waves. Somewhere far below, metal clanged, someone opening a gate. A radio crackled to life briefly, then settled into music, distorted but recognizable. "I made a change," he said. The sound of his voice surprised him. It carried weight now, shaped by breath and vibration rather than certainty. He felt it resonate in his chest, felt the effort required to form each word. Nick studied him closely. "You always were good at understatement." Piper stepped forward half a pace. "You're what, exactly now?" He considered the question. "Finite," he said. The word landed gently, like a stone placed rather than thrown. Dogmeat wagged his tail once. Nick exhaled slowly. "That's going to make a lot of people nervous." "Yes, and a few," Piper added, hopeful. Below them, a settlement that had gone dark days earlier flickered back to life. A single light blinked on, then another. A door opened. Someone stepped outside, stretching, unaware of the ridge above them. He watched without intervening. "I won't interfere unless asked," he said. "And even then, I may refuse." Piper raised an eyebrow. "That's a hell of a line to draw." "It's necessary." Nick tilted his head. "You're choosing not to be the answer." "Yes." Silence settled, not heavy, not empty, just space. The wind shifted again, carrying a different smell now. Cooking grain, faint smoke, the ozone tang of aging electronics warming up. The wasteland sounded alive in a way it hadn't before, not louder, just less cautious. Piper flipped open her notebook, then closed it again without writing. "People are going to argue about what you are," she said. "They'll get it wrong, repeatedly." He nodded. "They always do." Nick smiled faintly. "Welcome to the club." A shadow passed overhead, a vertibird, high and distant, engines muted. It did not change course. He felt the strain now, subtle but persistent. Limitation required maintenance, focus, the awareness that time would pass differently for him now, not as a concept, but as a force that would act upon him. He accepted it. The ridge warmed as the sun rose higher. Light spilled fully across the wasteland, catching on broken glass, rusted steel, and moving figures far below. Paths reopened, routes redrawn not around him, but through the world again. Piper finally asked, "How long?" He considered the arc ahead, uncertain, unquantified. "As long as I can," he said. Nick extended a hand. The gesture was simple, human, optional. He took it. Skin met synthetic metal. Pressure exchanged. The contact grounded him in a way no calculation ever had. Dogmeat barked once, sharp and happy, then trotted down the ridge toward the path leading back to the road. Piper followed, glancing back only once before heading after the dog. Nick lingered a moment longer. "For what it's worth," he said, "this feels like the right kind of strange." Then he turned and left. He remained on the ridge, alone, but not apart. The wind moved steadily. Gravel shifted under his weight as he adjusted his stance. Below, the wasteland continued, flawed, resilient. unfinished. He did not rise into the sky. He stayed,